Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a geopolitical earthquake. We are going to unpack the explosive conflict that has literally just reshaped the modern Middle East. For decades, the United States, Israel, and Iran have been locked in this high-stakes struggle, operating almost entirely in the shadows. But, as we've all seen recently, those shadows have completely vanished. What was once a covert struggle has officially erupted into open historical warfare.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what just happened, I want you to think about this staggering number, 38. That's 38 days. For over a month, the entire world was plunged into a severe global oil crisis. When direct conflict broke out, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz in early 2026, and well, it effectively paralyzed the global economy. It sent fuel prices absolutely soaring and impacted the daily life of practically everyone on Earth. It was a pretty stark reminder, wasn't it? A reminder of how quickly a regional dispute can hit your wallet and bring the whole world to a standstill.
Because honestly, the situation escalated with terrifying speed. In June 2025, right smack in the middle of nuclear negotiations, a surprise 12-day war began. And this was capped off by Operation Midnight Hammer. That's when American B-2 stealth bombers dropped massive bunker-buster bombs on Iran's deeply buried Fordo nuclear facility. But the conflict didn't stop there. By February 2026, the U.S. and Israel launched another wave of attacks, culminating in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So how on earth did we reach this terrifying climax? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock nearly 50 years. Let's look at Section 1, Roots of the Rupture. To really get it, we actually have to go way back. Before 1979, the U.S. and Iran were actually strategic partners. The U.S. had backed the Shah of Iran, and their military and economic ties were incredibly strong. But the 1979 Islamic Revolution changed the whole shebang overnight. Ayatollah Khamenei's clerical regime took power, instantly branded America the Great Satan, and really cemented this rupture when Islamist students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 52 Americans were held hostage for an agonizing 444 days. Diplomatic ties were completely severed, and as we know, they were never restored.
What followed that crisis was basically a textbook playbook of containment and proxy warfare. We're talking decades where the conflict just kind of simmered right below the surface. In the 1980s, the U.S. quietly backed Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War to prevent an Iranian victory, while simultaneously navigating the very secret Iran-Contra affair. Meanwhile, Iran started building its axis of resistance, a whole network of proxy forces spanning Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And this led to some devastating proxy clashes, like the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut. Tensions spiked again in 1988 when a U.S. cruiser shot down an Iranian passenger jet. In response to Iran's growing regional influence, the U.S. enforced crippling economic sanctions, which severely damaged Iran's economy and, of course, heavily impacted everyday Iranian civilians. But behind closed doors, this proxy battle was morphing into a high-tech, covert thriller focused squarely on nuclear containment.
Moving on to Section 2, the Secret Shadow War.
This is where things literally read like a spy thriller. Before Iran was even the main focus, Israel discovered Syria was building a nuclear reactor. In 2007, Israeli Mossad agents tracked the head of the Syrian Atomic Energy Commission to a luxury hotel in Vienna, and they executed a classic honeypot trap. A female spy engaged the target at the hotel bar, keeping him distracted. Meanwhile, other agents broke into his room, cloned his phone, and discovered startling photographs of a secret Syrian nuclear reactor built with the help of North Korean scientists. The Israeli Air Force subsequently bombed the Syrian facility.
But Iran's nuclear program, that was a whole different beast. A simple airstrike just wasn't going to cut it, because the facilities were heavily fortified and spread out all over the place. So, Israel and the U.S. pioneered a totally new kind of warfare, cyber warfare. By tricking an unwitting European engineer into bringing a virus called Stuxnet into Iran's Natanz facility, they actually infected the heavily guarded network. And this virus was incredibly specific. It only activated when it found a setup of exactly 984 centrifuges. It physically destroyed these machines by speeding them up and slowing them down, all while the computer screens falsely assured the operators that everything was running perfectly normally. It was an absolute masterclass in cyber sabotage, and it delayed the Iranian nuclear program by an estimated 18 months.
And this shadow war only grew more intense. It's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Starting in the mid-2000s, Iranian nuclear scientists were being targeted in the streets of Tehran. Then, in 2018, Mossad executed an unbelievable heist. They broke into a secret warehouse using 2,500-degree blowtorches to steal 55,000 pages of secret nuclear archives right out from under the Iranian government's nose. And the covert war reached a terrifying new level of sophistication in 2020. Iran's top nuclear mastermind, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, wasn't killed by a snipe on the ground. No, he was killed by a 1-ton, satellite-controlled, AI-driven robotic machine gun hidden in a parked van, operating with a 1.6-second data transmission delay from Tel Aviv. It's wild to even think about.
Okay, let's look at Section 3, the broken nuclear deal.
Right in the middle of all this unbelievable sabotage, there actually was this brief glimmer of hope. In 2015, the international community secured a massive diplomatic breakthrough known as the JCPOA. It was a very strict give and take. On one hand, Iran made massive concessions, agreeing to cap uranium enrichment at 3.67%, slash their enriched stockpile by 98%, and open doors to unprecedented international inspections. In exchange, the US, the UN, and Western powers agreed to lift the severe economic sanctions that had been absolutely strangling the Iranian economy. For a moment, it really seemed like a peaceful resolution was possible.
But as we know, that diplomatic bridge completely collapsed. Actually, scratch that. It was blown to pieces. In 2018, President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the U.S. from the JCPOA, calling it a flawed deal, and reinstated a campaign of maximum pressure sanctions. Iran responded by gradually abandoning the deal's limits, eventually pushing its uranium enrichment to near 60%, literally just a step away from weapons-grade material. Things spiraled even further in 2020 when a U.S. drone strike killed Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani. And then, the geopolitical map just fractured entirely. The October 2023 Hamas attack sparked a massive war in Gaza. By December 2024, the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria dismantled Iran's early warning air defenses, opening a clear direct flight path for Israeli jets straight to Tehran. The perfect storm had officially formed.
Which brings us to Section 4, motives behind the conflict.
So the big question is, why did this finally erupt into a direct historical military confrontation? Well, the sources provide two very different lenses for looking at the 2025 and 2026 strikes. The official U.S. and Israeli perspective is that this war was strictly about neutralizing an existential nuclear threat to prevent a rampant, unstoppable nuclear arms race across the Middle East, one that would have devastating global consequences. However, political scientist Nader Hashmi offers a very competing view. He argues that this conflict is fundamentally not about nuclear weapons at all, but about enforcing Western dominance in crushing a state that simply refuses to submit to American power.
Hashimi argues something really interesting here. He says Iran is essentially the last major holdout resisting Western and Israeli hegemony in the region. He points out a critical detail. Iran had actually offered to hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium, but this offer was turned down. For analysts like Hashimi, this suggests the true motive behind the devastating strikes was never really about ensuring a safer Iran or a nuclear-free Middle East, but rather about forcing a subservient Iran. It's a fascinating look at the underlying geopolitics at play here, and it's absolutely crucial to understand how different parties view the fundamental causes of the violence.
And finally, Section 5, a fragile peace. Now, regardless of the underlying motives, the sheer devastating fallout of the 2025 and 2026 strikes forced everyone, literally everyone, back to the negotiating table. The global economy simply couldn't sustain the disruption, and everyday citizens around the world were feeling the unbearable squeeze of the oil shortage. So, following a shaky ceasefire in April 2026, an interim peace deal was signed between the United States and Iran on June 15, 2026. However, while U.S. bunker busters decimated facilities like Fordo, it's highly likely that enriched uranium and advanced centrifuges remain hidden in deeply buried, undiscovered mountain bunkers. The nuclear program was hit hard, for sure, but it wasn't erased from the face of the Earth.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly pressing thought. With this 50-year shadow war now completely out in the open, and considering the immense destruction we've witnessed on all sides, can this interim peace possibly hold? Or is a final, comprehensive, and binding treaty between all three nations, the US, Israel, and Iran, the only true way to prevent this conflict from eventually sparking a global catastrophe? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next one.